Hello and welcome to Aliens Revealed Live. I'm your host, Dean Caparella, here on the Paranormal UK radio network. From alien abductions to monster-infested ranches to men in black, near-death experiences, close counter experiences and more, we speak to some of the most amazing people on the planet, ready and willing to share their chilling stories with you. And they all come from the Aliens Revealed Live files here on the Paranormal UK radio network. Well, the Nimitz Tic Tac video rates among the best UFO videos seen in recent times, and while everyone was looking at an object locked onto by US pilots, did they miss the real smoking gun evidence? What was that? The presence of extraterrestrials? Make no mistake, the fact the Tic Tac video was even released for public viewing is amazing in itself. Now UFO experts are tying it in with a soft alien disclosure. It could be part of the drip-fed process going on around the world at the moment. Information is only being released gradually over a long period of time. The truth is, disclosure really happened way back in 1947, when the Roswell cover-up took place. Just the mere act of appearing to cover something up shrieks truth being suppressed. That's a point often rammed home by ufologists. It's been described as one of the best UFO videos released in recent years. I'm talking about the Nimitz. But was the smoking gun evidence missed during that particular episode? Or was it another one of those trick card moves where you're watching the left hand, but the right hand is where the action is really happening? Jeff Krause is State Director of MUFON in Southern California, and he's investigated many fascinating cases over the years, the most notable the slow UFO and the encounter at Edwards. But it's the Nimitz episode with UFOs in 2004 that captured his imagination as one of a handful of his favourite ET encounters. The fact it happened in his backyard in California is one thing, but the reason Jeff Krause is highly thought of as a top UFO investigator is borne out in his interview during Aliens Revealed Live. Krause wasn't totally convinced the public were being told the complete truth. While the Tic Tac footage keeps being thrown out there as one of the best UFO videos ever presented for public examination, maybe it could have been even better, and Krause pointed out something that no one is talking about. Everyone has been fixated on the Tic Tac videos but seem to have missed something bigger, much bigger. This could be a case of being asked to watch the left hand while all the evidence is in the right hand. It's a common practice, and when done well, it's almost undetectable. The other craft that was in the area seems to be the real smoking gun. Krause is a gifted investigator and not easily fooled. Did the Tic Tac incident happen again 9 years later? So it seems. Despite the excitement of the Tic Tac craft, which certainly ranked with some of the best UFO videos ever seen, what was the huge craft travelling under the water's surface at the same time? Krause says the Tic Tac UFO incident mirrors a similar encounter at Aguadilla in Puerto Rico on April 25th, 2013. In fact, try and discern between the two. They're almost identical. Jeff Krause is joining us now to talk about that incident, underwater UFOs, and much more. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm really good, and really keen to talk about this topic, USOs. And I just wanted to start with, do you think there could be as many UFOs travelling beneath the surface of our waters as there are in the skies?
Well, Dean, first off, the only distinction between a USO and a UFO is where it is above sea level or below sea level. That is the only difference. They're the exact same craft. They have the exact same principles of propulsion, and that's what enables them, in fact, to be able to go through the waves without leaving a big splash or ripples or travel underwater at faster speeds than we can. The field that's around the craft gets them through interstellar space, gets them through our atmosphere, and they have no problem because water is basically just different kinds of gases at a different density. Makes absolutely no difference when you're using a field to move your craft rather than propulsion to push through an atmosphere or whatever type of resistance you encounter. So that distinction right there is pretty much nil. The same thing, I think.
Yeah.
Now, as far as what's our planet made of, it's mostly water. So I think their largest playground is underwater. And if you want to hide somewhere, Well, on Earth, that's your best bet. We have very little reconnaissance underwater. And, satellites can only view so much through the water. They can only detect so much. We do have good radar and we have good sonar. And that's how some of these encounters have been able to be captured, because we were able to track some. I don't believe we're able to track all of them due to the fact that, they have quite higher technology in use than we have. But every now and then they slip up.
Yeah. I was watching a UFO investigative show recently, and they were trying to solve a mystery, and they looked at four different cases during the show, and the one common factor they came up with at the end was that water was involved every time. It was either a lake or an ocean.
It's incredible how many instances there are of accounts with UFOs either near water, in proximity of water, near dams. And, one theory I have is any force in nature, a naturally occurring force that's going to provide energy, could be something that's tapped into by them. This is one of the things we don't know. I mean, sure, there's accounts of them over nuclear energy plants, and the no-brainer there is that they're able to siphon energy off a reactor somehow. We can't explain how they do it, but somehow there's been reports of that happening. Over water, and especially hydroelectric dams and things like that, I think it could be the same principle as that, or perhaps they're just using the water to separate it, and there's their source of hydrogen. They probably have, the technology to get energy out of water a lot easier than we can. So that could be a good explanation of it, or maybe they're from a water world. Right. Maybe their home environment is underwater. See, these are things we don't know. And, we make a lot of what we like to call educated guesses. And in truth, they're supposition, because we really don't know.
Ivan Anderson created a stir with his book, Invisible Residents, about 30 years ago, when he suggested that there could be a separate civilization older than Homo sapiens existing under our oceans.
I'm not familiar with that book, but now that you mention it, I'm going to want to read it. I see nothing incredible about the hypothesis. Could be. We know very little about what's under there, and, it doesn't take a whole lot of technology. If you're on this ocean floor and you dig a tunnel and make a cave under there with an airlock, well, that's about all it takes.
Yeah. Well, I think they made a couple of movies shortly after the book was released. One of them was The Abyss, and it kind of went along those lines, where that underwater civilization existed and actually saved the lives of the crew in the end. But it's quite an interesting theory.
Well, the myths that we have going back from prehistory and on talk of civilizations under the water, and we can't think that they were all hallucinating back then or just making stuff up. They had pretty strong beliefs in that had to have some sort of origin point.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even really discovered anything really under our oceans. In fact, I think the search percentage is really low. So, I mean,
no, and as technology gets us further down, we're making discoveries every time that we never thought were possible.
Yeah.
Look at the life we've discovered by sea vents. We never thought that would be possible at all. And now it's giving us greater vision as to what we can look for on exoplanets in our search for life.
Yeah.
So,
Jeff, what proportion of UFO sightings are reported to MUFON that are water related?
I can't give you an exact percentage of the cases that have been closed as USOs or unknowns. It's probably around, I would guess, the 10% range possibly, but it could be higher. Now, you got to consider that roughly 95% of the cases that come into MUFON are easily explainable. They're not the ones that we really are in this for. It's that 5% of cases that fit the criteria where they can't be explained. No matter how we try to break the information, it stands up, and we have to go along with the fact that that's, a good case in a UFO, or UAP, as they like to refer to it now in Navy jargon. But I myself have had a significant number of cases that involve either being right next to the proximity of the ocean, craft on the ocean, or actual USOs from under the ocean. So, I'd say that my personal cases of the unknowns I've closed, that would be maybe 3 to 5% of my own cases.
Yeah. Well, your area is a real hotspot. The Southern Californian coast has attracted a lot of theories that there could even be an underwater UFO base there. So, and a lot of people are paying attention to that.
It depends on which theory of the underwater base you're talking about. I think there's probably something on the far side of Catalina and down in the depths there, maybe up more towards Monterey in the gorge there, because that's goes down to some sudden drop-offs in some really deep areas. Now, there was a big flap a few years ago about someone saw on Google Earth this plateau that looked like an unusual shape and structure and seemed to have pillars in front of what looked like a cave and a subterranean entrance. And these are, theories put forth by people who don't totally understand how Google Earth works, for one thing. This is a satellite many miles above the Earth taking photos directly down. As far as I know, they don't have the capability to bend light yet to get a photo going inside a structure or an opening to determine anything. Now, you get many anomalies there, and this one in particular is well known by the United States Navy. It's called the Shoyu Mount. They've had submarine practices near there. It's a fairly well-explored region, heavily trafficked by ships above ground through the channel. So it is really not a likely location for a base anyway, especially if you want to be unobtrusive in your approaches and departures. Now, with the Nimitz encounter, when they saw many craft descending from 80,000 feet to sea level repeatedly, that was on the other side of Catalina Island, not the close side that you can see from shore or the area traveled through the channel. Now, repeated visits from that altitude over a few days by multiple craft that were tracked on radar, going at some speeds clocked at 7,800 miles an hour or more. Now that tells me that there's something going on the other side there. We don't know what. We're making supposition by this because we have no proof or evidence. But, hey, I'm pretty sure that they weren't diving looking for fish there. Okay, that was, something going on. And when the encounter group sent investigators to fly out and see what was going on, they noticed a huge bubbling in the water, like 60 feet in diameter, as if there was something larger under the water. But then, of course, we hear they followed the attack UFO, which was a good story, and they got great gun camera footage of that. But I want to know about the large thing under the water there. I mean, did they ignore that? Did that just go away? Or is there more to the story that's classified and we're not hearing about? I tend to think that might be the case because, if I was an admiral, I sure wouldn't be deceived by a diversion going off, one way. Sure, I'd have someone follow the diversion, but my attention would still be on the larger object that was discovered. I sure wouldn't forget about something that size in the water. Yeah. So I'm sure that was tracked. We just haven't heard the details of that.
Yeah. I'm not sure how much you know, but is like the Malibu anomaly all part of this area?
Well, the Shoyu Mount is not very large in reality, and it's off the coast of Malibu, but there's not the coastline in Southern California along that area is really kind of boring. There's not a lot of features, especially underwater, that you would see, not like up further north, say around the Monterey Bay area, where they actually have deep canyons going down to, some great depths out there that are relatively close to the shore when you start getting access to that canyon. A lot easier to find things like that. And again, down in the San Diego area, there's canyons off of La Jolla and the areas down there that go deeper quicker than any of the areas up around in that Malibu or Catalina Channel Island area until you get to the other side of the Channel Islands.
Right.
And then you get to the drop-off of the continental shelf and it starts getting deeper.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of abduction reports involving USOs?
Well, people don't really know where they go when they're taken in these abduction reports. There's a lot of the abduction reports where they're taken out of the smaller craft into larger hangar-like areas or what they think might be larger ships. But again, they can't nail down that location. So you can't rule it out. Again, if they do have some kind of an undersea base, it would only make sense that, they would be able to have access to it however they wanted to use it. Just on the same other side of the coin, it could just as easily be deep underground and land too, and they wouldn't know the difference. Now, in the Travis Walton abduction, for example, he was gone 5 days. Now, we really don't know where that little ship that he left went when it left the forest region in Arizona. But it's pretty much a given that he thinks he was taken to a larger ship and had more room to move around in it when he escaped kind of and roamed. It doesn't fit the inside of the original ship he was taken in. That was just too small to have provided details that he provided of when he came to. So where something like that could have been, it might have been outer space, it might have been underground, it could have been any place like that he was taken, as with many of these people that report going on board ships. The smaller ships, I believe, and this is a lot of people crack up when I say this, they go, why don't they have bathrooms? Well, because they're not in them long enough to need them, for one thing, is a firm belief of mine anyway. Yeah. Good shuttlecraft on Star Trek, you don't see a head on those. They just use them real quick down from the Enterprise onto the planet. And I think that's what a lot of these smaller UFOs are. Obviously, they have technology greater than ours. But would you want to travel to Pluto in a Volkswagen, or would you want to go in a Winnebago?
Yeah, Winnebago.
I rest my case.
Yeah.
And supposedly they have superior intelligence, so they've already thought of that.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I saw a craft myself over Azusa, California in 1979. It was rectangular in shape, and it was about a mile in length and probably about a half mile in width. Although I can't accurately gauge that. I'm guessing the width. I did see the San Gabriel Mountains in the background from it, so I could tell they were higher, and its altitude was probably like this. And it was passing overhead a parking lot that my girlfriend at the time and I were coming out of a market, and happened to catch the peripheral motion like this and looked up and saw it. Along with, there was it was a large parking lot in a suburb of LA, Azusa, heavily trafficked area. Mm-hmm. There was probably at least another 100 people in there. And they saw it as well because there was whistling and hooting going on, kind of like a rock concert type atmosphere. And this thing was only moving about 25 miles an hour, which, that's incredibly slow. We don't have anything that can stay in the air going that slow, for one thing. But then it all of a sudden stretched out into this thin line of light that snapped to a point and then went up and gone that quick.
Wow.
So, and that Azusa is fairly close to the ocean. Maybe 50 miles inland at most, about 25, 30 miles from LA proper. San Gabriel Mountains, of course, run along parallel and become the Santa Monica Mountains at the end when they peter out, and there's the Pacific Ocean, which interestingly, that's where the Battle of LA took place as well, the craft that was seen then. And there are accounts of that craft from the Battle of LA submerging in Santa Monica Bay as well. So again, USO, UFO, it's the same thing. It just, you're talking about the element it's flying through, I think.
Yeah. You talk about USO abductions. If we could ever solve the Bermuda Triangle mystery, I'd say we'd come up with our big abduction theory.
I've been through the Bermuda Triangle, and it was, humid as hell, a lot of lightning, a lot of strange, stuff that an LA city boy hadn't seen before. And I do think I saw some kind of bioluminescence in the water going on, because I remember the waves had kind of like a green glow to them, which I attribute to some type of algae and bioluminescence. From what I understand, there's a lot of reports of magnetic disturbance in the area, and perhaps that's a large cause of many things. Perhaps it's an area where there's even a portal. Now, what they call a portal, let me say. Now, again, we're talking things that we can't prove exist, but witnesses to, say, the Philadelphia experiment, which was an actual real experiment that the Navy conducted, did say that they saw a type of tunnel opening up that looked like it was formed through clouds and some type of vortex, which are the same descriptions that we have from encounters that happened in the Bermuda Triangle and other places with similar anomalies on the planet. Now, just because we don't have the technology at our disposal doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I'm a firm believer we don't know what we don't know, plain and simple.
Yeah.
There's many discoveries still ahead in the world of physics and quantum mechanics and things. And I think we're going to have an incredible future coming up very soon because of the incredible discoveries they're making at an exponential rate, I might add.
Yeah.
So the fact that these things exist and we can't explain them doesn't bother me too much. And when I hear witness accounts of them, okay, witnesses are taken in courts for just about any crime or other thing you might go to testify for. Witness accounts are highly credible, especially when it's deathbed confessions or things like that. So witness accounts, although, some people don't give them a lot of credibility, I do. And especially, older accounts through history that have passed through the ages of things like seeing lights in the sea, Christopher Columbus's logs coming over. They saw strange lights in the ocean. And there's absolutely no reason to think that these people who made it through history as being incredible explorers, why an account like that should get any less credit. I think they recorded everything else pretty accurately. So why should we even suspect for a moment that encounters like that were not recorded accurately?
Yeah, because that's a good point, because I was going to ask you that there are some amazing encounters that have been reported in the past but don't get the mainstream publicity that a lot of reports get.
Absolutely. And even in the Bible, like encounters like Jonah being swallowed by the whale.
Yeah.
Well, do we really think that he was swallowed by an actual whale? Or was it something large that came up from the bottom of the ocean, he went into, and they went back down, and he was gone for a while, and definitely came up a changed man from that encounter? So, is that possibly an early USO report? I do believe so.
Yeah. It's perception of people back in those days on how they would have described something.
Exactly. You only have the tools at your disposal, exactly like the cargo cult in the South Pacific during World War II. We're used to coming in, bringing all lies, and life was good during that time for them. And then when the war ended and we didn't go there anymore, well, they missed this cargo that came from the sky, so they started building effigies of the airplanes in hopes that the gods would return and bring their cargo with them again. So it's very easy to start whole belief systems on encounters just like that.
Yeah. I mean, the one we always hear about is, say, the Shag Harbour incident. But from what you've seen and researched, I mean, what would be your favourite cases?
Well, of course, my favorite cases are going to be the ones that I investigated myself. I have one. Yep. Let me get right here and get started. Whoops. It says my internet connection is unstable, but I'm going to plow ahead here.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to give you three cases in chronological order. Two of them are very well publicized because they have gun camera footage that has been released on YouTube and then on the internet. And To the Stars Academy started talking about them. And then so did also the Scientific Coalition of Ufology, which I have a couple friends that are on that. Morgan Beale, who used to be the state director for MUFON for Florida, and Richard Hoffman, who used to be one of my start team bosses for MUFON. Unfortunately, Richard's no longer with MUFON. We do miss him, but he's still doing fantastic work in the field. So those two cases were very well researched and a lot of scientific data to them. This particular case here is one of my own cases that I investigated that happened in 1991. And it was a gentleman who was on drug interdiction duty down just off the coast of Guatemala then. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, their ship was lit up with this red light that emanated from under the water. Okay. And it didn't light up the sky or anything else. Only their ship was entirely illuminated, the bridge, the deck, and everything with this red light. And it was observed by many of the people that were on duty at the time on the bridge. And as soon as this light was seen, it took off and disappeared real quick. And this gentleman is willing, I'm going to do further involvement in this because this was so long ago, but it was a Navy case, and they did make a report of an unusual object on the bridge. So there's going to be paperwork trail for me to follow on this. So okay. I plan on writing a FOIA request in the very near future. I still haven't closed this case with MUFON yet, but I have conducted investigation with the main witness. And I'm convinced that, what he's saying is credible. Mm-hmm. He has a very good reputation on the ship. So he's hoping to get more of his crew members to speak with me as well. And I'm hoping to get them to talk about it, even though it's been 30 years almost. A lot of them are still alive and willing to go on record with this. So there's going to be more information on that particular case. Now, one of the ones that I wanted to talk to you about in particular was the Nimitz encounter, which I think I mentioned earlier a little bit about it. And actually that encounter went on from, I think it was November 10th to the 14th of 2013, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And but the main action happened on November 14th. But for 3 days before that, they've been observing these objects traveling at high rates of speed from high altitude to dropping down all of a sudden to sea level or below sea level just off the coast of Catalina. Now, they were having planned exercises in that area, and since that would have obviously interfered with anything going on with their exercises, they sent out an explorer group to take a look and see what was going on. And again, when they approached and got towards the area where these craft were dropping from, they noticed that larger craft under the water. Now, let me pause for a moment here. I'm hitting the pause button. I've dealt with so many instances of misdirection and lies and deception from military branches when it comes to the truth about UFO cases that my suspicious hairs on the back of my neck, my hackles go up when they divulge information of any sort willingly.
Right.
I'm still not at the point where I can take truth from them and mark it as truth or the whole truth, or is there a reason they're letting this version of the truth out? I'm highly suspicious. And in this case, I think one of the reasons is because the more interesting aspect of this encounter is not mentioned, whereas a white tic-tac shaped object that you really only get to see a blur of in infrared video, zipping around along some grainy ocean water. That's compelling. Sure, they got gun camera footage of something from one of their planes chasing it, and it did exhibit, if you follow the readouts in the photo of the speed and altitudes and angles, it did exhibit extraordinary characteristics. But again, it could have exhibited more extraordinary characteristics, and there could have been better video, I feel. And we're following that story instead of any narrative about the larger object. What did it do after they approached? What happened during the exercises? Was that larger object involved? And here I find, the Shag Harbor case, I will say one thing for that is most interesting. When the craft entered the water, later they discovered that it was 300 feet or 300 yards off the coast. So they were able to know that it traveled. Whereas the Nimitz encounter, you don't hear anything about the craft traveling under the water. so much.
Yeah, it might be a case of look at the right hand and.
I think, it's exactly that. And I think that probably the more interesting aspect of that story is probably highly classified. Mm-hmm. That's why we're not hearing about it. Now, in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, on April 25th, Nimitz Encounter, it was November 10th through 13th. That was 2004. Okay, that's why I was trying to go in chronological order. Now, in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, on April 25th, 2013, there was an encounter that pretty much mirrors exactly the Nimitz encounter, except this time they were able to get observational data of the movement of the craft underwater, and they were able to measure its speeds at up to 95 miles an hour, which that's not anything we can really do underwater.
No.
Due to the resistance, we're pushing up against a wall with our technology, whereas this is more of a magnetic field that makes a bubble that just slides through wherever it's going. So, and, I believe that the Navy has been engaged in recovery of some type of technology like that they've incorporated into their fleet. And I hope I'm not giving away any top secret information here, but, there's now electrostatically charged holes on our ships, and that's to cut the friction going through the bow waves.
Wow.
Well,
that's interesting, yeah.
Where did they get this idea from?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the Navy has had a lot more knowledge about UFOs and USOs than has led on in prehistory and above. And I say this from kind of a slightly educated viewpoint. My dad was in the Navy. He served during World War II. And I think possibly later he might have been part of OSI, which, as you know, devolved into the CIA. And I based this on the fact that after my dad passed, he worked for the phone company, Pacific Bell, for 40 years, for one thing, telecommunications, which was a highly specialized field. And his specialization there was crossbar. And he was responsible for the conversion from the old style crossbar units in the phone company to fiber optics. Yep. But one of the things I found after he passed was this little camera right here. I'm going to hold up close so you can read it.
Yep.
You can find an exact copy of this in the CIA museum. This is what they used back then, made out of bakelite. Very small. This was not available to the public. Yeah, my dad had one for some reason. And the reason I think that he might have known more about UFOs is, he wasn't a very emotional type person, not one quick to anger or anything, very stable. But when the subject of UFOs came up when I was maybe 8 or 9 after watching something on TV, and of course a child, your favorite question is, but what if?
Yeah.
And, that's an innocent question, which I think was met by an over response of my dad getting red in the face, veins bulging in his forehead and neck, and saying there's no such thing as UFOs. And in a rather loud voice, which I won't do on the air. But, and as a child, I thought that response was, a little bit strong, especially nothing. Which I tend to think, looking back now, that was more of his security conditioned response to that question to anyone. He's from that generation of World War II where, loose lips sink ships.
Exactly.
And he held that motto very tightly up to his deathbed. I might also add that he was very upset by the Battle of Los Angeles, which he was witness to, lived right close to where it happened at the time. He lived in Monterey Park, which is kind of near East LA, and everything was very visible to residents there at the time. All of the Southern California basin there pretty much was witness to the gunfire and events going on. He never talked about that to me, and my mom later in life, when I started showing her the photos of that famous LA Times photo where the searchlights convene and you see a saucer shape, she admonished me not to talk to my dad about that because it was still more than he could handle. It was very emotional for him.
Wow.
Which, I have to wonder why that response would be and why he never talked about any of these things in his life, Well, I think there's that connection.
Well, I guess he was just following protocol, I guess, in the end.
That's what they did at the time, and now there are witnesses coming forward to that event as well. In the documentary UFOs and Nukes, I believe, there's a witness who was a child at the time in Manhattan Beach and actually saw the craft go overhead and then into the bay.
Wow.
So I found that information kind of fascinating.
Yep.
There's also accounts that one of the craft might have gone and crashed into the San Bernardino Mountains near the Lake Arrowhead area, or Blue Jay. And again, that's, a large body of water where something could have gone in. And
okay. All right.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. Well, we're almost out of time, Jeff, but just on military and Navy personnel and Air Force personnel, does MUFON ever get any reports from people in those areas? But
all the time.
Yep. And you can pass them on to the public?
Yeah, in fact, they're in our CMS database, which is accessible to the public. Now, there are some gentlemen from military cases, which, of course, they wish to remain anonymous because of their security oaths. They don't want to lose their pensions, things like that. And I totally honor that. I respect it, and I understand it. That one case you mentioned at the beginning of the show of mine, the encounter at Edwards, is one such case which I found very fascinating. Security personnel from Edwards itself were on patrol when they saw a 30-foot diameter disc hovering over the rocket laboratory there. So I take their testimony as being, pretty credible, especially when they suffered 2 hours of missing time, when all their communications equipment, electronics, everything was out, and they thought it was only a couple minutes. When radios came back on, the base personnel were fairly frantic looking for them, and they'd been missing for around 2 hours.
Yeah, and it's hard not to take the testimony of these guys and gals, especially in their position. Why else? Why else would they put themselves out there? And
well, absolutely, none of these people have anything to gain by the reports. They're not asking for anything, and they're not really getting anything, except for in some instances where they do allow their names to be used. They, get the respect of coming forward and telling the truth about what they encountered.
Yep.
But really, that's all they're asking for in most instances, is someone to listen and to take them seriously. Mm-hmm. And you got to value that, because that's very human.
Okay. Well, this next question is a standard question I've asked everyone on disclosure. Do you have any thoughts on disclosure? Well,
I don't believe that if any of the listeners are waiting for someone to come up to a podium and make a grand announcement, that's not going to happen. Disclosure has been going on for at least 15 to 20 years now in the form of the media we've been exposed to. Shows like Ancient Aliens, radio shows like Coast to Coast AM. These are all things which could not have existed in the 60s or 70s. The shell started cracking with things like Eric von Daniken's Chariot of the Gods, which, of course, did very well in theaters, as did the book. And I'll credit that as being the start of the crack in the ice, perhaps.
Yeah.
Because then people started talking about it and looking at the evidence that was presented there and saying, well, maybe. Yeah. And that started the discussions.
Do you ever have a thought about what the world would look like post-disclosure?
Well, look at the world now. And disclosure has been going on for so long. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is the reaction to that in desperation from entities and corporations and beings who would stand a lot to lose from their power structure if things as free energy and, technologies such as that, faster to light travel, any of that technologies were made common knowledge. A lot of people would stand to lose the pipeline of money that's been coming into them for a very long time. So, there are very powerful people who stand a lot to lose. They really don't want any of these technologies or information coming to light. Our United States government and our military definitely does not want some of this technology falling into our enemies' hands. I'm already worried by accounts that the Russian Navy has a craft that can move at hypersonic speeds underwater. And again, I have to wonder, where did they get that technology from? What did they recover?
Yeah.
So, there's many questions like that, and it keeps us busy and keeps us on our toes, I'll tell you, Dean.
It certainly does. Jeff, it's been a great discussion today. Really enjoyed it, and I'd love to get you on again at some stage to talk about one of your pet subjects, parallel universes and dimensions. But we've just run out of time for today. But before we go, you got a couple of books in the wind at the moment: the Field Investigator's Toolbox and the SLO UFO.
Absolutely, and I promise I'm going to publish them before I die. They've been in the work for quite a while, but as I said, I've had to update and re-edit some of them. And volume 1 is nearing completion. I should have it ready pretty soon. Slow UFO, I'm going to write another round of FOIA requests before I actually publish that, because the first round of FOIAs I got some very interesting responses from, and they 50-year mark for secrets, though, hadn't passed yet. So now that it's been 52 years since the incident actually happened, I'm going to write another round of FOIAs, because in that time period, there's probably some more information that's been declassified. And that's what I'm really after, the meat and potatoes. The photo's great, but I want to know what happened, who took the photo, and what's behind it.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great story there. Okay, so and people with any reports that they may have been holding back and think it might be too late to make, they can just contact you, MUFON.
Absolutely. Go to the MUFON website, www.mufon.com. At the top bar, you'll see very easy way. Just click on there to file a report, and the nearest field investigator will contact you as soon as possible.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
You bet. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
That's leading California UFO researcher and investigator Jeff Krause. Deciphering the crop circle message has been an obsession for Jennifer Stein since they first appeared on the scene more than 50 years ago. Stein first studied ancient earthen mounds as a teenager before becoming hooked on crop circles. While many have tried to decode the crop circle message, no one really has the answer, despite some excellent theories being put forward by experts and students alike.
Yes, there have been a number of eyewitnesses. A very famous one named John Whalen. People claim his footage is hoax, but he was actually sleeping on Oliver's Castle. And I think this was about 1995 or 98. I'm not exactly sure on the date. But he's an Englishman, camping out, had a tent, had his nice little home video camera on a tripod covered with a baggie, because it gets very damp and moist, in England at night. And he woke up at about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning and heard this very unusual sound. And he got out of his tent, was looking around. He really couldn't see much going on, but he pointed, turned on his camera, and his camera didn't even have a viewfinder, right? He had to look at it with his eyepiece. And he just turned the camera on and pointed it in the direction where he was hearing the sound coming from. He didn't even move it. He just turned it on, and then he was looking around thinking, well, maybe he'll capture something. And sure enough, he captured these two lights kind of coming in and floating around in the crop. And then the crop kind of just literally fell down instantaneously. And there are other people who have reported this. A guy by the name of Art Rantala here in the United States, I think in Mayville, Wisconsin, was getting ready to watch a rainstorm move across his field and his property. And he saw some wheat like just wiggling all of a sudden, and then it just kind of collapsed. And then he saw a shadow in the field. And he walked out there the next day, and sure enough, there was, crop down. And it was investigated, and it had the typical energy signatures that we see, like expulsion cavities, and seed germination studies were done. And if the soil sticks to a magnet, if you take a good-sized magnet into a field and just dig up some soil and stick the magnet to it, if it's sticking, well, there's something unusual there. That's a quick, easy test, right? You can walk, 50 feet to the right and test the soil over there. And if you don't get the same thing, something kind of unusual went on.
That's Jennifer Stein. She's one of the world's best experts on crop circles, and she shares some interesting stuff with us in our next show. You don't want to miss it on the next episode of the Aliens Revealed Live Files. Thanks for being with us. Don't forget to check out our site at arlhub.com. That's arlhub.com. And as always, keep looking upwards and take care.